the role of enabling full public participation in elections, unfettered scrutiny of the candidates and government, among others, even as we borrow on the positives in terms of the United States media freedom. So we're doing things a little bit different on today's edition of Africa Speaks, and I just want to introduce some of the guests joining me in studio. We're still expecting one more gentleman, but needless to say, these are seniors in the journalism field. Allow me to start with Victor Bwire, who's joining me right here. Thank you so much for your time. It's great to see you.
Pleasure. Yes.
It must be a busy time at MCK,
yes,
I can imagine.
We are running, but we are managing.
Definitely. We'll get some insights on what MCK is doing. He's the Director of Media Training and Development, equally joined by a familiar face on TV screens, perhaps not on the local scene as such, but he's definitely well knowledgeable in terms of matters election locally, and equally will borrow in terms of what happens in the United States of America. I'm joined by Vincent Makori, who's a managing editor at the VOA English Service. Karibu sana.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much. And familiar face for those who have been around for some time in the local media.
Definitely. But we also see you on the other side as well.
Exactly.
Good things you're doing.
Exactly.
I'm tempted to ask if your Swahili is still up to par.
You want me to try that?
Well, give it a shot.
Yeah, man. Kiswahili changu safi sana. Ukipenda tunaweza kuzungumza Kiswahili mpaka mwisho au namna gani?
You've even outshown me. This is really proper. Thanks so much, gentlemen. A little bit later on, we'll be expecting Eric Oduor, who's the chairperson of the Kenya Union of Journalists. And I brought you here, gentlemen, just to take a stock of the journey that has been in terms of media freedom, the fourth estate, the citizens' watchdog. We're coming to a very delicate time as a country, the 2022 general election in just but a few days. But let's retract first, before the coverage of the general election, and I'll begin with you, Bwire. I'm just taking a look at a report right here in terms of press freedom, and Kenya was ranked highly this time round in 2022, 69th out of 180 countries that were vetted. Last year we were ranked 102nd. So from your position at MCK, what do you think we've done right this time round as a country, as a fourth estate, in order to get such a high ranking, quote unquote?
Thanks, Jason. Pleasure sharing with Vincent here. Obviously, it was shocking to move from 102 to 69. That was a big leap. And initially, we asked ourselves: is it that it's a full leading fools? Is it that that other countries are doing so poorly that we moved up, or is it that we have improved, that we have done well? I mean, we asked ourselves those questions, and out of that, actually, we have commissioned our own internal study, a national study. We are calling it the National Media Press Freedom Index, a local one, obviously borrowing from the Reporters Without Borders, NEPAD. The other one was Freedom House. So, but we are doing a local one where we develop, because we also asked ourselves why the big leap. I mean, from number 102 to 69. That was a bit surprising, but because the conditions are still prevailing. But one major thing that happens around press freedom indexing is they look at the legal environment of a country. What is the legal environment that prevails? And our three articles, largely 33, 31, 35, have been hailed as some of the best in terms of provision and constitutionalizing access to information, press freedom, and media freedom. So it's very strong compared to other countries. It's the first time the former constitution only mentioned in the former section 79 something around press freedom, but this one now is anchored in the law, and that's a major plus. If you looked at anything, look at a number of cases that were declared unconstitutional by courts. Look at the Security Amendment Acts. Look at the Cybercrime Act, which had nearly 29 sections declared unconstitutional. So that then meant the criminal defamation was declared unconstitutional. So that obviously for people who work in regulation and media freedom were major major improvements. Though we still have nearly 21 laws that have negative implication on press freedom, but the four articles plus that goodwill that things like criminal defamation, things like the Computer Cybercrime Act, and previously the section, the Miscellaneous Amendment Act on security that had brought a lot of this through the Prevention of Terrorism Act, and others were declared unconstitutional, meant that the country is making progress. Remember last year when we were 102, even Ethiopia was rated to be better. And what had happened in Ethiopia was largely the goodwill from government. They introduced a media council. They introduced some that seemed to be positive. Okay. So to us that was, but there are things we still need to do. But averagely, the country is doing fine on press freedom. Okay. The only other thing you also notice that with now things like SDG 16A, which requires every country to make a report on safety and security, with our signing of other international conventions, the number and documentation and monitoring of press freedom has gone up. That cases that would ordinarily during Makore's time were ignored, right now there are things like sexual harassment in newsrooms and others are now being reported on a higher level, and that has also meant that we are on a higher alert. But generally, things have improved big time, and Makore can confirm that if we looked at Kenya today and Kenya 10 years ago in terms of press freedom, a lot of things have, but we can do better. There are things that we need to improve, but we are doing very well. Okay, we'll definitely get to highlight some of those gray areas that need to be worked on a little bit later on. But Makore, with so much experience working in the local journalism field, perhaps comparing then and now, what exactly do you think is better for us as journalists who are serving within the Kenyan market?
In a word, it is day and night. That's the difference. You know, we're talking about some of us were in the field 20 years ago, over 20 years ago here in Kenya. And that is the time when the freedom of the press was actually under attack every day. And you had a hard time even telling the very ordinary stories of people or anybody who, you know, who is perceived to be, say, in opposition to the government or even critical of the government. That would be enough to throw you into prison. You would be arrested and sometimes charged with treason just because you interviewed a person who is perceived to be in opposition to the government of the day. Okay. Now, there are many stories that never saw the light of day, first because of the legislation, because of the strong arm of the government, the overreach, but also even self-censorship, because journalists had to be on a survival mode every day. You had to ask yourself, can I even touch this? But again, the media houses were not as many as we see them today. I mean, go back when I started television and radio, KBC was the only thing in town.
Yeah, it seems such a long time ago.
It's quite a while. And then, of course, KTN came along, and it kind of opened up the space a little more. There was more freedom we saw, but even then it was under pressure. It wasn't easy. So the others were the print media, Nation and Standard, of course, at the forefront. But even the print, you know, the universe of the print media was very limited. Pretty much those are the ones we talked about. And then there was the Kenya Times, right, which was controlled by the government. But if you go back then, I'm telling you, and you compare to what we are seeing today, you cannot fathom what we went through as journalists. Okay. I mean, it's hard to explain to you. So I have to say there have been gains over the years. Of course, there are things that you feel should change. And there are things that you feel even the media itself should reevaluate on how they approach the coverage. But I think there's so much freedom today. There's so much freedom. The extent you can actually have a person saying things that are extremely critical, for example, the leaders of the country, and to the extent that you can have people of opposite sides sitting together in a studio and they can exchange whatever they need, they want to exchange, and you don't have any backlash from any quarters. But again, being able even to report on stories, as Victor's mentioned, even on issues of sexual harassment, you know, including some that touch on our newsrooms and all that. So I have to say, in short, there has been so much improvement in the media. There have been so many gains. I'm not surprised that actually the country's in the index, it has really been rated that highly. I'm not saying that we have absolute freedom. I'm not saying there are no areas to be, you know, to be looked at and improved. But if we talk just, you know, look at the just comparison to the 20 years ago, 10 years ago, yes, it is like day and night, my friend.
As simple as that. Well, we'll definitely get some nuggets of wisdom as we continue with the discussion. But allow us to take a look at what the Kenya Editors Guild, in a meeting with a couple of ICT officials, including the Cabinet Secretary of the Ministry of ICT, Bwana Joe Musheru, what that meeting actually brought forth. Now get this, the ICT Ministry says 96.4% of polling centers have access to 3G network to allow for poll results transmission. The ICTCS says satellite phones will cover 730 centers that lack connectivity. He was speaking during a meeting with members of the Editors Guild just recently, where the CS dismissed plans to shut down any social media or the mainstream media during the elections. Listen in briefly.
Yeah. So first of all, we are a government, and even though you're saying CA is independent, nothing takes away their independence. They regulate, but we all manage policy and direction together. When you are electing a government, these are policies that have been agreed in the manifestos, and we work from that point of view. So let me answer first those questions about directions to CA and shutting down. There's nothing illegal about security instructions. The law is very clear. When the National Security Council has sat and given direction on certain things, those are implemented. And I think they were implemented. But we are on record that we are not shutting down first the internet. I think as a country, you all know, people have spent a lot of time and made a lot of comments and statements, even of His Excellency the President, that are false, but it has not led us to shutting down. So as the President has stated, there is no reason to then shut down the internet during this election period. I think we enjoy a very democratic space, and people, yes, make a lot of statements that sometimes are not true, and sometimes insults, things that we don't even, they're unprintable, and so on. But we've made that commitment. Your president was earlier asking me about the comments on NCIC and shutting down the Facebook platform. I made a comment and a statement that as government, we are committed to the freedom of press. The same was reiterated by the Interior Minister, or CS, Fred Matiang'i, because that is our position as government. We are not going to or planning to shut down any media. But if we have a security issue, a national security issue, that becomes a different story. But for now, I don't think there's anything that we are anticipating that would lead to that kind of action being taken.
Well, the ICT Cabinet Secretary Joe Musheru just perhaps reiterating on the importance of media freedom and their intentions of not shutting down any social media or the mainstream media during this year's elections, which are barely 4 or 5 days away, mind you. Allow me to introduce our third panelist who's just joined us, Eric Oduor. It's great to have you with us. He's the chairperson of the Kenya Union of Journalists. And perhaps you can begin with you, perhaps your reaction to what the government says is the goodwill to work with members of the press in order to, make sure information reaches Kenyans as it should in a factual way. What's your reaction, briefly?
Yeah, thank you so much. I want to say that it is very important that the media enjoys freedom to do the work that the journalists are supposed to do, because we know actually what breeds violence is anxiety. So if the information is not trickling down to members of the public, the anxiety sets in, and that is where now people start flying around with rumors, and that leads to violence sometimes, because people will start complaining that why are we not getting timely information from the media? Is there anything that is happening? Is there any plans to rig elections? Is there anything that is happening so that we are denied to access to the information? So I agree with what CS has said, that the media will be allowed to operate. Internet will not be shut down. In case of any problem, I think that can be addressed as and when it arises. But what I know is we cannot just take that statement 100% because even today we were having a meeting and we are just looking at some of the laws that sometimes the government uses to curtail freedom of the media. So like he has said in last statement, mark that statement, that the event that they suspect that we are likely to have an ugly situation, then they are likely to take that action. So you can also underline that statement. The government can use that as an excuse because we are looking at some of the laws and they will say that, oh, you know, there is some breach of peace and therefore we are going to take such kind of action. But at the moment, we agree, yes, we need freedom of the media to continue growing and allow journalists to serve members of the public.
Okay, but so far so good as it stands, yeah?
Exactly, so far so good.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, well, that's really proper. Victor Bwire, I know MCK sits at a position where it needs to do a tough balancing act, protect the views of journalists and their freedoms from perhaps the government and members of the public, but on the flip side as well, protect the government as well from the press and, you know, the members of the public as well. Even as you perhaps enunciate on this tough balancing act, what do you think of the criticism that has been fronted towards members of the Fourth Estate in terms of unfair media coverage? Because we've had some of the main political camps bring this up. That camp is getting more coverage than we are. This should be highlighted. As MCK, what do you have to say about that?
No, thanks. The issue of media criticism is global. It's a good practice in every profession for people to get feedback and criticism, so long as it's not name-calling or bashing. If it is professional critique and feedback, that should be encouraged. That's the essence of things like public editors in newsrooms, because we must, I mean, journalists are not perfect. Mistakes happen here and there. So to us, that's fine. The other thing is that, again, we have looked at this thing and said media bias, for example, is a global, again, issue that people grapple with every day. And media criticism does not necessarily mean that journalists are not professional, that are not being fair to others. Okay. But there are other factors that also go into a media bias, for example. And for that reason, these things will happen. If, for example, I'm launching a manifesto today, and Vincent is not having any events, obviously I'll have more coverage than him. It doesn't mean media is favoring me. So there are factors that play around why somebody, if for example somebody has 7 press conferences that have messages that are good, and one has only one, obviously the other person might get more, not because, no, so we just allow journalists to have their professional discretion. They are trained people, they are professionals, they make their own judgment. In any case, we are living in a very competitive market. For any media house to show open bias, you will obviously be hit by the audiences, the market, and the market will bring you back. So we are never worried. But these things happen because many of the people who talk about media are bashing. They are not criticizing. They are not giving factual information. And they use this old generalization, media in Kenya. Somebody watches one TV station and says media in Kenya, yet we have 135 TV stations. Okay. We have 200 radio stations. So some of these, like today I've just seen one of the Facebook, and even the people who are being mentioned are not journalists. They were even just guests in our studio, but somebody is saying journalists in this particular. So we are doing those fact checking, but obviously a number of our stations, because we also should not be using the 6 media stations to make judgment on the media in Kenya. I mean, when we talk about 200 radio stations, Nation, Standard, KTN have things they can't do. They are very established newsrooms, but there are things that happen in other newsrooms outside Nairobi, where one person is the editor, the husband is the newsroom, the son is the reporter, and those things are happening. So those things happen. But generally, we are not worried. I mean, about some of those things, because sometimes I can give you an example just quickly. Briefly, I can give you prime time, 3 minutes on TV. I can decide to give you 5 hours at 3 in the morning when nobody's listening. So some of these things are dynamics that people must, and that's why we're talking about media information literacy. People must be helped to understand how media operates.
How it works as well. And he mentioned it's a global concern. I don't know if in America, the freedom of the press is protected by the First Amendment, as we read. What's the situation there? Is there media houses that are claimed to be leaning towards one side of the political divide, and how do they go about it in such advanced countries?
And I'll actually mention, I'll talk about that, but I wanted to just make reference to something you said about people claiming, for example, he gets more coverage than me. Some things are subjective, and also it's perception, because in the media, environment, especially politicians are in competition, and when we're sitting here, I can kind of, if I try to start calculating the minutes, I can say, you gave him more time. He spoke more, or you asked him better questions than you asked me. So some of the things are just subjective, and also it's in the spirit of competition. So from your point of view, you feel like this was unfair. I don't think it was, they covered it more than me. But when it comes to the freedoms in the U.S., as we just mentioned, yes, the freedom of press and freedom of expression are enshrined in the Constitution. They're very elaborate, and it's really that works. It really works. People have the right and the freedom to, conduct, run their media the way they do. But also the laws also protect the people against the media. So that is why the legal framework works for the media. It protects the media, but also people are protected against abuses by the media or biases. So people do go to court sometimes when they have been for example, if there's issues of libel, or there's defamation in the media and all that. But when it comes to just the general practice and accusations of bias, I like to look at it this way. The media houses are owned by human beings. These human beings sometimes have certain political leanings or social leanings. So it is a struggle also for some to kind of maintain the middle ground. But if you look at the media landscape in the U.S., there are media houses that are very open about where they lean to, especially when it comes to their political flavor. And they're not shy about that. But they will still talk about being free and fair in the way they do it. And you can see that in terms of, at times of the election. Media houses come out and actually endorse a political candidate. They endorse a political party. So they are not lying or shy about where they lean to. But that does not stop them from really practicing proper journalism, even having stories that may criticize people of the same party that they support. So they walk a fine line. They try to be as professional as they possibly can, of course. But there are media houses that are they are known to lean towards a particular political side, and they do not make apologies about it. So you will see how they tell their stories, who they invite to the interviews, who are their analysts and all that. So that is there, and that of course does bring about criticism and complaints from especially politicians, depending on what the issue is all about.
Okay, and I think a point we'll bring out a little bit later on in terms of the media facing discrediting by some of these political leaders. Case in point, here in Kenya, we had an instance where the president once mentioned gazeti ni ya kuuza nyama, so indirectly discrediting the media. In your case, in the United States, perhaps that's fake news. I think we definitely had a lot of that with the former President Trump. But allow us, gentlemen, to take a short break. As we come back, we'll continue with the conversation, even as we center around the media and the elections. What are the gains that we've made so far since the 2017 election? What areas do we need to perhaps improve in order to ensure the media serves its all-important role as a citizen's watchdog and serve real and credible news? You're watching Africa Speaks. Stay with us. We'll be back in just but a few.